I grew up in Lagos, Nigeria. I came from a close-knitted family, even though I came from a poor family. But they gave me education with the instruction that this is the tool that will help me to dig my way out of poverty and ignorance. I came without a dime in my pocket. All I had was big dreams, determination to succeed, and the resilience. So coming from another country gave me that insight to be able to understand and deal with people from different backgrounds.
I was walking into Kroger to pick up a prescription for my mom. Upon approaching the pharmacy, I slipped and fell in some liquid. I went to see my regular doctor, and that is when I knew that there was more going on from that fall. I then called Mr. Olawale, talked to him and let him know what was going on. I could just say that he's very professional and knowledgeable about what he does. He's very passionate about what he does, and he cares about his clients. I felt like I was a part of the Olawale family.
The goal is to make sure that our clients will leave feeling that someone gets them, knowing that someone was able to be the voice for them.
We needed an attorney because we needed somebody who understood the relationship between our case and the law. We had been through 4 different lawyers. We were very desperate. We knew from what we had heard that Emmanuel Olawale was the man, who could take us through that experience and see us through and give us the kind of outcome we were looking for. For him, your case is personal. He gave us hope. He gave us encouragement, and we knew that we had found the right man that would see us through.
Just know that when you're coming through the door, you're coming in through a place where you will be accepted and welcome as family, where you'll be seen as a person. At the Olawale Law Firm, we get you. We understand you. Trust us. Yeah, welcome to this episode of Legal Angle with Emmanuel Olawale. I have a special guest with me today. Her name is Merisa Bowers. She is a family law attorney. She's going to be educating us about shared parenting. If you are a couple going through the process of deciding how to share parenting, or if you're already going through shared parenting, she will educate us about how to do that. Welcome to the show, Merisa.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here, Emmanuel.
Oh, thank you. Can you please tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I appreciate you having me here, and it's really a pleasure because I know how seriously you take client-centered representation, and how your story, in some ways, I think resonates with some of my family's history too. So I grew up in Northeast Ohio, and I am the great-granddaughter of Lebanese immigrants. My great-grandparents immigrated to the U.S. On my mother's side. Both her mother's parents and father's parents came from the Baca Valley. And when they arrived in the U.S., the thing that they prioritized for their children was education. And for part of that, the law and getting law degrees also was a way for their children to gain access, gain middle-class lifestyle, but also to really live our family values, which are to support people who may need help. And that story, that theme from my mother's side. Both her father was an attorney, and two of her uncles were attorneys. That story was very much conveyed throughout my life about how we use the privileges that we have, that we get through education, to fight for other people and to serve other people.
Wow, that is awesome.
So
Wow.
yeah, it's been a very meaningful part of my life, and something that that I knew early on. I think when I was a little girl, I always knew I wanted to be a lawyer. I had a couple detours, and I wasn't sure necessarily that that was going to be my path, but ultimately it was, and I'm very glad it was. I went to the University of Cincinnati for undergrad, and then to Case Western for law school. And I graduated, and unfortunately, when I graduated, it was during the recession in 2009. And that, graduating with very good grades still, and not having a job to enter into the workforce, I think helped me learn a lot about myself and a lot about my willingness and my dedication to fighting for myself and to really working in this field. So I moved back to Cincinnati after I graduated law school, and started taking on whatever work I could find. Knocking on doors, hitting the pavement, going to talk to any lawyer who would listen to me, and just saying, "Hey, do you have work I could do for you? Can I do some research? Can I write a brief?" And then in the meantime, also getting on the court-appointed list to do criminal defense work, because that was something that I had worked to learn in law school. And then I absolutely loved doing that work, and worked as a criminal defense attorney for the first few years of my career. And then moving back to Columbus, I shouldn't say back to Columbus, but moving to Columbus in 2012, I recognized the extraordinary need for compassionate and client-centered family law representation. So I was office sharing with a well-established family law practice, and they were able to mentor me, help guide me, make sure that I was, having the right sense of how to handle these cases, how to approach them, because it's not just about knowing what the revised code says, but it's also about knowing how to serve families, how to really think through the long-term benefit, and the long-term obstacles that each family is going to encounter, but also appreciating what's the nature of our courts, what's the tendencies, what are the proclivities of our judges or our magistrates. And so having mentorship had really helped shape my first 10 years of practice.
Wow. Go ahead.
Okay, sorry. So I stopped doing criminal defense work for the most part after my son was born about 5 years ago. It became a little bit too much to manage a lot of different aspects of my life. But I still have that skill set, so that if a client comes to me and has an overlapping case, I'm able to still represent them. And I find that to be a great benefit, where they have continuity in an attorney who can navigate a misdemeanor, for example, and go across the street and navigate a temporary orders hearing too, as related to their divorce. So I appreciate that I have that background, that I'm able to provide that service to my clients too.
Wow. And you have that divergent skills that makes you not just one, and not just an expert in one side of the law. You're able to help people in different ways without having, just switch their hat from being a criminal defense attorney to a family law attorney to handling civil protection order and things like that.
Yeah, we can really take a more holistic approach when a case needs it, and I think I have a good ability to look at it from both sides, from both the person who's been accused of perhaps domestic violence, or and also the person who has experienced it. So being able to appreciate representing both people involved.
Thank you. And what was it like growing up in Canton, Ohio?
Yeah, so I had a great childhood. I always lived a couple blocks from my grandmother, and my relationship with her was very close. She loved languages. She was very proud of being Arab American. And so while we didn't speak Arabic in the home, but she spoke French. And I cannot speak it anymore. But being multilingual, being around someone who was very proud of her ethnic background and wanted to make sure that it was something that I was raised to identify with as well, was really important. And then, of course, I think it's a pretty common experience for second generation or third generation immigrant children to experience your ethnicity through food. She taught me how to cook what she had been taught to cook from her mother. Which I understand is not not necessarily the modern food that's eaten in Lebanon, but it's interesting to think that what the dishes that we still serve at home are the dishes that were served 100 or 150 years ago in Lebanon.
It must have been wonderful to grow up around such rich heritage.
I think it gives you depth, right? It gives a certain depth to your family history, and I think for me, it made me feel part of, and the ownership, I think, of knowing that I'm carrying forward my family's legacy, right? They moved to the U.S. to give a better life for their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. And knowing that I have an obligation to that effort that they put in, and being proud to reflect that. It definitely shapes you.
Oh, great. And what was high school like for you?
High school. I did not have a great high school experience. So you are making me really dig deep on this. So let's see. So we moved. I grew up in downtown Canton. Actually, I grew up in the home that my mother grew up in downtown Canton, and I went to Canton City Schools through 8th grade. And then my mother was an educator, and she was, I think, probably maybe a little too close, and so saw, I think, a lot of things that concerned her, perhaps about the high school that I would have been attending. And so at that point, she thought it was important that we consider another option. So we moved to a suburb of Canton, and starting at that suburban high school as a 9th grader was not a good experience for me. It was very difficult. I have a very strong personality, so it was hard for me to have a peer group. But I had been on swim team actually with a lot of the same kids in middle school, because we were in a community swim team. So I did know a lot of kids who were on the same swim team. So that was a good place socially for me to be, and I had a great experience with my swim team.
Are you a competitive person?
I used to think not, and I think I have to admit that I am.
You're a competitive person with a strong personality. Was that what led you to choose the career of law?
Another key part of my personality is I want to be a problem solver. I want to be a fixer. And the competitive thing, it's interesting. I think I'm really competitive with myself. I think I set goals for myself that I want to see myself achieve. And yeah, I think that the idea of being able to go to law school so I could navigate systems and I could feel empowered and then share that empowerment with other people was a really big part of why I chose the career path I did.
Thank you. Are you the first lawyer in the family?
No. My great uncle, two of my great uncles were attorneys. on my mom's mother's side. So on my maternal grandmother's side, my great uncle, Robert Nader, he passed away a couple years ago, but he left quite the legacy in the law. He was actually a state representative in the state of Ohio, and then went on to serve in Warren County he was a Warren County city council member, or Warren, Ohio, not county, and then went on to become a Trumbull County judge, and then sat on the 11th District Court of Appeals, and had some visiting assignments to the Ohio Supreme Court in his career as well. And then my mother's father was an attorney as well, but he passed away at a relatively young age, and his career was not as illustrious as my great uncle's, but it was incredibly important. My mom tells stories about how he would take cases for anyone that needed him, no matter if they could pay or not. And oftentimes he would take the case because he felt that the person needed representation, and that was the only reason why he would take the case. I think he also had quite the streak of anti-establishment, or perhaps a little bit of sort of was willing to speak his mind. I have this fantastic photo of him holding a protest sign that says "Stark Bar Establishment Unfair to Lawyers." And it's just such a great reminder that I have a proud history of people who are willing to speak up against things that they find and systems that they find to be unfair.
Yes, you came from a family of super achievers. Yes, you started college at the University of Cincinnati during a time of unrest in that city. Can you tell us a little bit about that and how that shaped your worldview and profession?
Yes, absolutely. So I started college in 2001. I think the day I was supposed to leave for college is actually September 11th. So that morning, my brother and I were at home. I had finished packing and was waiting for my parents to get home from work to take me to college. They were going to drive me down to Cincinnati. It was about a 4-hour drive. And my brother and I got a call from my dad. Actually, the phone kept ringing and we weren't answering because we were just hanging out. But the phone kept ringing. So we answered the phone, and my dad told us to turn the news on. And so we turned on the news and saw what was happening in New York and Washington and Shanksville. And then the drive down, and I don't remember if we left the next day or if it ended up being 2 days later, but the drive down was eerie. It was there were no airplanes in the sky except for military planes. There were hardly anybody on the roads. So starting college on that day, I don't think I certainly know I didn't appreciate it then at 18 years old, what was going on and how much the world was changing. So that had a huge impact, but also it was particular going to Cincinnati at that time too. That prior April, there had been a serious excessive use of force incident where a Cincinnati police officer had shot and killed a 12-year-old boy named Timothy Thomas. And that had led to civil unrest in Cincinnati and curfews and some significant destruction in some of the more urban areas that were just down the hill from the university. University of Cincinnati sits up on top of sort of a ridge of hills around the basin before it goes to downtown into the more commerce center of Cincinnati. And so starting at University of Cincinnati, when the city was very much going through the grief, the anger, and then eventually the reconciliation of how to reshape and rethink urban policing with a community-oriented mindset, that very much shaped my my college experience. I got involved with this organization called Cincinnati Tomorrow, and Cincinnati Tomorrow formed in 2002 or 2003, and the goal was to really think about how we could improve first ring communities and the central business district, how we as citizens in a grassroots way could support small business, could support minority and women-owned business, and that were impacted by the protests and the civil unrest and the destruction that had happened in the year prior, or the 2 years prior. And through Cincinnati Tomorrow, I really started to learn about concepts around urban revitalization, around the concepts of integrated housing, and why specifically mixed income and mixed ownership models of housing are really important to stabilizing urban communities. And then also why mixed use development also helps stabilize urban communities too. So all of that really led to a pretty strong passion for thinking about how we map out, how we model, how we create policy to really improve our neighborhoods and then the cities and the communities beyond that.
Now, and while in law school and while in college, you focused on political science and international human rights. Why international human rights?
Mm. Gosh, that's a good question. I think it was because around that era too, we had the Rwandan and Yugoslavian wars, and the genocide that happened in Rwanda was something that we studied, and something that I was interested in the international response. And the lack of international response, frankly, because there was very little intervention initially, which is in part what allowed so much destruction. And the creation of international criminal tribunals, I think, coming out of the conflict in Yugoslavia and coming out of the conflict in Rwanda, and there are some other international tribunals that popped up, I was fascinated by. And the philosophy behind creating what are these uniform standards of conduct, and how can we integrate not just Western ideas, not just American or British ideas of morality or ethics or what the law should be, but looking at some standards that can apply across all countries, across all nations. So that really fascinated me.
Oh, thank you. And now you've been an attorney now for years, and like you said, when we started, you're in general practice, but then you also focus on helping families through custody, divorces, and things of domestic issue. So
Yeah.
which brings us to shared parenting.
Yeah.
Can you tell our audience what shared parenting means?
Yeah, absolutely. So shared parenting is one of two legal forms of custody in Ohio that Ohio law recognizes for parents who are no longer in the same household. Shared parenting in some places is called co-custody or shared custody, and what it means is that both parents are considered to be equal legal custodians, equal decision makers in the eyes of the law and in the eyes of other institutions that may be involved, like schools or doctors or things like that. With shared parenting, though, I think one thing that I always follow up with that is to say that shared parenting does not mean necessarily 50-50 parenting time. And that's a different analysis. And so I guess just to start with what is shared parenting, it's the presumption that both parents come to the table with equal legal footing. And what's great about this is that I think that the culture of our courts and the culture of decision makers and the culture in our legal industry has shifted to really create parity and equality, I think, between both parents. And so when we had never married parents, parents who were unmarried, there was this, there's been sort of a resistance that to the idea that maybe the father would be a shared parent. I am seeing that change. I've seen that change here, even just in my career, and I don't think that that's going to go back.
Thank you. And who determines whether parents should share custody?
Yeah, that's a great question. So currently, there is really a presumption among most of our magistrates, most of our courts, that there will be shared parenting. So a lot of times, if if there's a question, and let's say a divorce case or a complaint for custody is filed, the court is going to tell us that the first hearing, I'm starting from the position that this is going to be a shared parenting case. Now you tell me why it shouldn't be. So ultimately, the decision maker is going to be the judge, is going to be the court. But along the way, in getting there, there are some folks that are involved sometimes in that decision process, such as the guardian ad litem, or if there would be a custodial evaluation, which don't happen very often, but can sometimes. A psychologist or a psychiatrist might weigh in on that opinion, on an opinion on that as well. Does that help? Does that answer the question, or do you want me to go further?
You can keep going.
Okay. So I guess that ultimately, things that would make you not have shared parenting, or factors where that would result in us not having shared parenting, would be a scenario where one parent is perhaps unable, incapable of really being an equal participant in the child's life, or being an equal decision maker. Scenarios where there is an active and severe substance abuse disorder or substance abuse problem, or if there is untreated mental illness that leads to one parent being unable to be a participant in those day-to-day decisions. That could lead to an outcome where one parent would be a sole custodian and the other one would not be.
Thank you. And you mentioned a guardian ad litem being involved. Who or what is a guardian ad litem?
Sure. Yeah. So in Franklin County, we rely pretty heavily on guardian ad litems to help interview and make recommendations as to the allocation of parental rights. A guardian ad litem is an attorney that's appointed by the court to investigate and look into different aspects, interview the parents, interview other caretakers or teachers, receive school records, and create a report that consolidates that information and presenting that report then to the decision maker in the case, which might be either a magistrate or the judge assigned to the case. The guardian is typically paid by the parties. Usually that cost is divided 50-50 between the parents, subject to reallocation in the future. So if one parent perhaps earns a lot more than the other, that the higher earning parent may be obligated to pay more for the guardian ad litem in proportion with their incomes. But there are lots of factors that would contribute to a reallocation, or to have how that cost would be split between the parents. Other courts use special advocates. There's a court-appointed special advocate program called CASA. I'm not as familiar with that because it's not typically used in private custody or termination of marriage cases. But CASA attorneys are involved in a number of abuse, neglect, and dependency cases, or things like that.
Thank you. And does shared parenting affect child support?
That's a great question. Yes and no. Or I should say it depends, right? Which is like the the favorite phrase of lawyers. So it depends. There is actually currently a bill pending in the State House that would create a presumption of not just shared parenting, but actually 50-50 parenting time. And I think that there's even within the legal profession, I think opinions are fairly split on that bill. And I'm curious to understand. I don't quite know what the background of why it was introduced, but I'd be interested to know why it was introduced. I'd say in most of Central Ohio, the counties that I'm familiar with, most of the time we do want to look at whether we can do 50-50 parenting time. Can we equalize parenting time between the parents? And if there is a reason not to, then we start to look at those factors. Perhaps it could be work schedules. I've had cases where one client works third shift, perhaps, or cases where they do not live close together, or they do not live within an easy driving distance of each other to transport the child to and from school. And that can affect parenting time. And the reason why I'm answering your question by talking about parenting time is because parenting time has a lot to do with how and whether we are looking at what child support numbers are going to be. So, excuse me. In all cases, we start with a guideline child support worksheet. And in 2018 or 2019, the child support guidelines were revised by statute. And they were recalculated. So cash medical support changed. And I think in general, it seems like the guideline numbers tend to help bring I think they bring child support, the actual amount, maybe perhaps in better alignment for most of my clients. I'd say generally most of my clients find it to be a good thing. So with a guideline child support worksheet, that will be able to tell us if we were to just have sort of an old-fashioned schedule, right, where maybe one parent has alternating weekends and one night a week, and what would that parent's child support obligation be under that scenario? The new guidelines also build in an automatic 10% deviation or 10% discount if there are 90 or more overnights in a given year for the parent who's going to be paying support. The new worksheet also, the new statute also tells us that if the paying parent has 147 nights or more in a given calendar year, that there is a presumption that they should be entitled to a downward deviation from that guideline number. So that's why when I start to talk about does shared parenting affect child support, it affects it depending on what that parenting time schedule is. So sometimes what we see happen, and there are lots of different approaches, but if there is equal parenting time, one parent still could be paying child support. Other factors are taken into consideration, like how much each parent earns. Are there other out-of-pocket expenses being paid by one parent or the other? Who's providing private health insurance, and what are the premium costs associated with that? Daycare costs or childcare costs, extracurricular activities, those types of costs are all taken into consideration. And whether or not one parent receives financial support from any other source, or if they're sharing household expenses with someone else. So all of these factors can be taken into consideration when we're setting a child support number or deviating from the guideline.
Thank you. Can parents who live in two different cities or states still have shared parenting?
It depends. Yes, I think they can, absolutely. It works best if they are good communicators. So shared parenting, we can overcome a lot of things. We can overcome distance, we can overcome time, if the parents are willing and able to communicate in a way that's really healthy for their children. And so I think that we could have a parent who's working third shift, or we could have a parent that lives in Florida who could still very easily be a shared parent if they are actively involved and helping to make day-to-day decisions and important life decisions with the other parent about their child or children.
Thank you. And what are those benefits of shared parenting that you've noticed with your clients or that you know generally as a professional?
Yeah. Well, I think that one of the most important pieces and why I think our courts favor shared parenting is that it helps equalize the power disparity between parents. It helps equalize their sense of access. It helps create, I think, parity really between the parents, and that can help reduce power struggles. It can help reduce one parent feeling like they're obligated to make all the decisions or to be responsible all the time. And so I think that whenever you can reduce struggles between the parents, even if they're not in the same household, you're still going to serve the child. Our kids pick up on all of our stress, right? Like our kids know, even if we're not exposing them directly or shouting in front of them, they're picking up on it. And so if we can help bring that level of conversation back to a respectful place, that's important. And that's going to serve the kids who are involved with all these cases.
Thank you. And we know shared parenting involves sharing parenting, custody or co-custody, but then we're also aware that not everyone likes to share. So you
Mm-hmm.
have some parents who don't want to share the parenting, but then the court forces them to share parenting. So how do you advise those people on how to handle the shared parenting?
Hmm. Yeah. So in a scenario where the court has ordered shared parenting, but for whatever reason, my client does not appreciate that or doesn't really want that to be in place. Yeah. So I love a tool called Our Family Wizard. Our Family Wizard is an app that can be installed on your phone or on a mobile device. And there is a cost associated with it, but it's only, I think, about $120 a year per user. So about $10 a month. And the great thing about Our Family Wizard is that it helps consolidate all the things that you might need to talk about into one tool, into one platform. You can enter in all of the children's activities into calendars. You can enter in data about their care providers. You can exchange receipts and document expenses related to the children. And it'll even tally, like the app will even tally up what share each parent is responsible for and calculate how much reimbursement should be. The other really nice thing about Our Family Wizard, especially for cases that are maybe more litigious, is that it gives date and time stamps for when emails are read. It tracks IP addresses and email accounts for who's reading those emails. So it helps demonstrate that if one parent is communicating information and the other parent is either refusing to acknowledge it or claims they didn't see it, we can show that communication did happen when a calendar entry was entered, when it was deleted. I had a scenario recently where one party communicated something on Our Family Wizard that perhaps was ill-advised, and that person tried to delete what they had communicated. Our Family Wizard tracked that and was able to show that the communication had been deleted. So it's a really great tool, and I really recommend it. The other tools that are out there are we can sometimes refer people to parenting coaches. Parenting coaches can help in a way that maybe after lawyers are done, but there's still maybe a minor conflict or an issue to work through. We can refer the parents to parenting coaches to help them work through that particular issue. I also recommend, I'm a big believer in therapy. I think that having a counselor of your own to talk through, especially a really good one that is good at helping you, especially as I tend to have a lot of clients with anxiety, right? So, and these types of cases can really bring out a lot of anxiety in us, right? So having a counselor that can help de-escalate that sense of anxiety and really give some specific tactics on how to manage that anxiety, I think can be really helpful for a parent who is required to be a shared parent when maybe it's very uncomfortable for them.
Thank you. You mentioned earlier that communication is key when it comes to shared parenting. How can a party handle the stress of having a co-parent who doesn't want to communicate or who is unresponsive?
Hmm. That's a hard one. So it's really tricky to get someone to do something that they have to, that when they're not doing it. So looking at what are those escalators, right? So I guess the first question is can you get the information on your own first, right? So if your complaint is that they're not sharing information provided by the school, or they're not sharing information provided by some extracurricular activity, my first advice to my client in that situation is that you need to go sign up to get those emails yourself. Make sure that you're included on those lists so that you're getting that communication directly. The next the next aspect, I guess, is if we're in the middle of litigation, right? And we can kind of catch it early, right, before it progresses too far. Can we get the guardian ad litem to make a recommendation and educate the other side about what they best practices? What should you be doing? What information should you be adding to our family wizard? And why is it important? Having a communication, me being able to sit down and talk to the other attorney and say, could you talk to your client about making sure that your client is adding in these details or communicating this information? Hopefully then that can lead to a conversation about, look, it's simpler to put it in rather than this to escalate. In a situation where they're not in litigation and so there aren't third parties involved that can make those asks, coaching my client to ask that party directly for the information in a way that doesn't automatically throw up the other person's defenses can be helpful. And if that doesn't work, then we try to, what are the things that we can do before we have to file a motion to modify or a motion for contempt if they're violating a prior shared parenting order that says that they have to provide certain information.
Thank you. Because a lot of people, or some people, find shared parenting to be very stressful, especially when it comes to parents with divergent values. How can parents, or how can parents handle that when they have one parent who has this value and another one with opposite values, and they're worried about how their children what their children will eventually turn out to be?
So in my experience so far, and I assume that maybe after another 20 years of doing this practice, I might have a bit of a different opinion, but I try to communicate to my clients that your child will be who they're going to be, and you need to model your values for your child. And if you can be consistent and control what's going on in your own home, your child will be able to make choices about what value set they find to be the most effective and that fits with their worldview.
And are there effects of shared custody on children?
I'm sorry, could you say that again?
Are there some notable effects of shared parenting on children?
Yeah. Well, when it's done well, we know that it can lead to, more better satisfaction and more mental health and mental stability for kids, which of course then leads to better performance in all aspects of their life. When there is a lot of conflict, we know the harm that comes to children when there's a lot of conflict in their worlds, right? So it's the same, I think, whether or not the parents are divorced or together. If the children are experiencing conflict between their parents, it can create all kinds of problems for them, short-term and long-term. It's not all going to necessarily result in long-term damage. I think there's a lot of mixed opinion on whether or not we should say children are resilient, but we all, we'll get they'll get have a therapy fund. I don't know.
It's always good to process these things in therapy. Like I said, it's easy to say children are resilient, but you don't know.
Yeah.
Most adults are a product of their childhood trauma. So, and one way or the other, we all carry our baggages.
Yes.
Some of those parents, the product of their parenting has to do with their childhood. So,
yes, that is such a good point. Yes.
Yeah. And do grandparents have a right to seek some kind of shared parenting with the real parent?
Yes, and this is a topic that is one that that carries some. It just has clicked for me. So Ohio allows grandparents to pursue companionship and certain rights when it comes to their grandchildren in certain situations. In If parents are never married, grandparents can file an action for certain rights. In a scenario where one parent has died, grandparents typically it's the grandparents of the deceased parent that would file an action for companionship and other types of rights. And in a divorce, actually, grandparents can under a revised code are permitted to intervene in a divorce and file an action for companionship time. I've seen a trend where this is actually extending out to other types of blood relatives, like aunts and uncles and things like that. So check the statute and check with an attorney, and local practice is the best advice that I have for that. But grandparents do have a right to file, and what I am seeing is that it's very much a case-by-case basis. And that it really does depend on the facts in your particular scenario. But there is a presumption that fit parents make decisions that are in the best interest of a child. And so technically, there should be a presumption that the parent who is parenting the child is making the right decisions as far as access to the grandparents goes. I'm not necessarily seeing that play out in our court system. It tends to be a little bit less. I don't know. Maybe I should take that back. It's hard to see trends. I suppose I'm just speaking from my experience, but my experience is that we generally want to see intergenerational contact.
Thank you. And you're currently serving as a council member within the Gahanna City Council.
Yes.
What has that been like?
Well, I really like to start things at very difficult times, apparently. So I got sworn in the middle of or actually at the very beginning of the pandemic, right? So I took office in January of 2020, and by February, we were starting to hear news about this little virus that that we all know have become very familiar with. So instead of new council member trainings and getting to meet directors, we were all quarantined. And this was pretty much my backdrop for my first, almost 7 months of council meetings. So it's been a difficult, I guess it was quite longer than that. It blurs together. So it was a very difficult start, challenging start, I think, for those of us who were new to public service in that way at that time. But it's so rewarding to be able to think about policy at a community level, think about it's still solving problems and serving families in a way that is, that we do on a day-to-day basis in our day jobs, just with a little different spin on it. But it's been very rewarding.
Thank you. And what are those things you've been able to work on, well, since you became a member of the city council?
Yeah. The big project that I'm working on right now is passing a housing non-discrimination ordinance. Fair housing and housing issues across the region have absolutely come to the forefront of everyone's minds. They were absolutely there a couple years ago, and now with the Intel announcement, which will just be a few miles from Gahanna, housing concerns, housing strain will continue to be a challenge, and is now even more urgent for us to wrap our collective hands around. One aspect of addressing the need for housing is making sure that housing is people are not being discriminated against when they apply for housing. We do have federal protection already in this area, but what I have come to learn is that HUD, the Department of Housing and Urban Development, recommends local level ordinance and enforcement, which fits in line very much, I think, and this ties a little bit back to what we talked about at the very beginning with how kind of international law, and like why was I drawn to that? In part because we were looking at how do we do a restorative justice model? How do we have people who are from those impacted communities creating the tribunal and hold accountable, correct and hold accountable the people responsible for problems? And I think in a similar way, when we create local ordinances, even if they're redundant perhaps with federal ordinance, at a local level, we can tailor something to much more of what the culture of Gahanna needs. So what Gahanna needs might be very different than what Topeka, Kansas, or Sacramento, California needs. And at the local level, we can do something that's much more educational, much more restorative, and much less punitive, I think, than maybe what the broader enforcement policy or structure might be.
Thank you. You work with the school board. You're currently the vice president of the city council and also a liaison with the Jefferson Gahanna School Board.
Yes.
What has that been like?
So it's with the school board, it's been wonderful. The school board has, as you know, I think, there have been a lot of changes going on and a lot of challenges going on with our public school systems. Gahanna is right there in the mix with what you're hearing across the region. Our supporting our school board to take on huge challenges. And one of those challenges was just selecting a new superintendent. And so I was able to be a part of kind of some of the final interview steps, along with 60 other neighborhood and community participants, hearing what our community had to say about these about the final the finalists in the search process, and then ultimately hearing what the board's selection and choice was, and then helping communicate that information out to the community as a whole too. It's been, there are some major challenges, there's major challenges, and one of those things that we're working on together is regional growth. I was just listening earlier today to an updated enrollment study that the school district is working on completing, and projections for new students and what those new populations are going to look like, and then how that impacts the buildings within our district, which of course impacts the fabric of the rest of our community, and impacts our city, the city formally as a body as well.
Thank you. You are married to a wonderful man who has been a first responder for over 20 years, and you have a 5-year-old son. And you also work as an attorney. You're also a member of city council. How do you handle the rigors of the stress of all this that you're doing at the same time, of being a mom, of being a wife, of being an attorney, of being a politician, and of being the vice president of the city council?
Yeah. Uh, I am very, very blessed that my parents moved to the neighborhood. And so they are very supportive. My mom is a retired educator. My dad was a small business owner in his first career and a nurse in his second career. And my parents, actually, they have my son today, and they are very involved in helping support our life, from making sure that we share meals on a very regular basis at my house and at their house. They have my son at least typically 2 days a week. So they are a blessing, and there is no way that I could do this without that support. And that's partly why I mentioned about the intergenerational, and grandparents are very important to me. And I had a very close relationship with my grandmother, and I think it served me very well. And so I'm very honored that my parents are as involved in my life as they are. And my husband, I would be remiss if I didn't mention that this is actually EMS week. So we are, I am proud to say that my husband has been a paramedic for over 20 years with Delaware County. And I am so grateful and honor all men and women who are serving as first responders in EMS and paramedicine. They do a lot of the hard work that goes unnoticed pretty regularly.
Thank you. And how can people contact you?
Yeah, sure. So my phone number, I think, is posted on the screen, and my email address is as well. Please feel free to call me at my office if you'd like to schedule a consultation, or if you have questions. My counsel role is distinct. It's separate from my attorney role. So I can be found on Gahanna.gov's website if you'd like to contact me related to any Gahanna issues. But my email address for my day job, my attorney work, is mbowers@adwllp.com. And the phone number is 614-221-0944.
Thank you. You've been educating the public for almost an hour now on Legal Angle. What does it mean for you to appear on this show?
It's, I appreciate this so much, because I think this is really important information to be able to share with people. And I think that it can help also take some of that stress out of when you're starting to think about ending a relationship. Hearing from an attorney about what is it going to look like, and what are some of the things that I should even be thinking about, and where do I even start when I start to think about how to split time up, or or what my life is going to look like. So having this opportunity and what you're doing, Emmanuel, is so important to helping reach people where they are and giving people an insight into the legal profession. So thank you for this opportunity, and thank you on behalf of folks who are watching this.
Yeah. And thank you for spending your time with us and for educating us without charging about shared parenting. It's really appreciated. And for those of you who are also watching us at home, we thank you for your time. And for those of you who are listening to this as a podcast, we thank you too. Until next time, tune in for another educative and entertaining, informative episode. Until next time, stay safe. Thank you, Merisa.
Thank you.